Welcome to this latest edition of the Real Deal podcast. I'm your host, the Real Gerald Quinn. This is episode 821 of the Real Deal podcast. I break down. We look back at another great episode of the best show on television, Snowfall, season 5, episode 7, lying in a hammock. That is a Richard Wright, not Richard Wright, a James Wright poem. We'll talk more about that over the course of the podcast. Before we get into the podcast, I want to give a shout out to one Adrian McDonald, who is the sponsor of this podcast with his all calculator measures clothing. I sent out not a link, but I sent out a picture of one of the sweatshirts or t-shirts on my Instagram post. So I'll definitely I can definitely look forward on that on my Instagram post as well. Some other posts that I send out as well. So shout out to Adrian. He's doing his thing. We're probably try to get Adrian on a podcast in a few weeks to discuss, his journey post pandemic. Well, I shouldn't say post pandemic, but because we're kind of technically, I guess, still in a pandemic. But we hadn't spoken to him in a couple of years, so we'll try to get him on a podcast. This was another just splendid episode of Snowfall. Give a quick recap. We see Franklin, Jerome, Louie, and Leon discussing, the next steps with Kane. We see Jerome go on a journey to find Peaches. We see Franklin Oso and Teddy Mack reunite. We see Leon, of course, meets with Kane. We find out some more about what transpired with Peaches and why he did, and where he's at right now. We also see Franklin having trouble on the home front as far as the mother and his fiance as well. So a lot went on. We're going to begin, as always. We're going to begin with the deep dive. We're going to deep dive two great characters, two of my favorite characters, Jerome and Leon, who are really headed not exactly in the same directions, but they both are in a mode of transformation and evolution. You have both of them that are searching for something outside of their current lives, and in terms of the streets and the drugs. We see Leon, and we see Leon, talk to Jerome about, it bothering him about the black on black crime. We saw in this past couple of episodes, a couple of episodes ago, Leon really starting to get in touch, thinking about being a revolutionary and how those type, revolutionaries move with the Black Panthers and things of that nature. So and even in the scene, and we'll talk about this in best scenes, Kevin basically tells him, I can see you, you're not the same Leon that I remember in terms of, your attitude and things of that nature. We see Jerome really go through it with the mental health. We see Jerome be, basically called out by a doctor when he's on his looking for Peaches after somebody accidentally bumps into his hand, that he, bumps into his hand, and turns out, of course, he broke, 2 bones in his hand coming off the fight. Well, if you want to call it a fight, coming off basically punching, beating the hell out of one of the drug dealers from last episode. But Jerome's been going through it, and we see Jerome finally start to deal with himself from a mental health standpoint. And Jerome needs something outside of the current situation. And we see Jerome wanting to go back to his roots, to the community. Remember, Jerome is a guy who, grew up as a football star. Okay, grew up in the neighborhood of LA and was a football star, and so sold some weed, some dime bags. But Jerome never was, in his heart of hearts, a murderer. That's not who Jerome at his core is. It's something that Franklin and Louie kind of pulled him in, and he and Louie, of course, are together. Franklin is his nephew, so he, almost in a sense had no choice with his life, um, the way things have turned out. But this is not Jerome is not a killer per se. Will he kill? Yeah, to protect his family, absolutely. But Jerome, we see Jerome wanting to get back to being what he once was. And we see Leon trying to find out who exactly he is. So two characters searching for something outside of what their current situations are presenting to them. And it's going to be very interesting to see where this lands, how this impacts Franklin Saint, because it's definitely going. We know that these are the two closest people outside of Franklin's mother. These are the two closest people to Franklin, especially with Franklin and Louie not seeing eye to eye. We'll certainly talk more about that, in terms of Leon being his right hand man and Jerome being his uncle. So, a very introspective episode from that standpoint with Jerome and Leon. Themes of this episode: transformation and ever. I said, y'all listen. It's been a long week, people. So I'm sorry. That's not how you spell evolution, but I meant to say evaluation. Evolution, transformation, and an evolution. That's supposed to be evolution. So we talked about that. We see that through the characters, through Leon and Jerome, and even with um, even with what Louie is becoming and has become. Louie Louie wasn't you know a queen pin at the beginning of this series, but mostly this is about Jerome and Leon, when it comes to these two particular themes. Best scenes. So opening scene, we have Franklin, Leon, Louie, and Jerome. They're discussing Kane. Franklin and now, mind you, Franklin and Leon rode together in the car. They clearly had a conversation in the car because Franklin barely said something throughout most of the scene. Leon wants to make good with Kane as far as he wants to basically have a truce and settle up with Kane. Explains to Louie and Jerome, hey, we killed his brother, and the fact that they realize that this guy doesn't care. Like Kane does not care about dying. Kane is not scared. They realize that if they go at Kane and try to kill Kane, it's going to be an all-out war. And neither Franklin or Leon want an all-out war. Jerome and Louie are on the other side. Like, hey, this guy came after us. We're not going to wait for him. We're not going to just sit up here and wait for him to hit back again. And they're expecting, Louie and Jerome are expecting Kane to hit back. So those four are clearly in disagreement in terms of how to approach dealing with Kane. Leon says, "Look, let me talk to him. If that goes wrong, then I'll do it myself." So Leon says that, but Louie and Jerome are not. They're not buying it. And then we had the scene, a very poignant scene between Jerome and Leon at the end of the scene where Leon says, "Look, we don't want to. Not only do we not want to go to war, um, we need to stop killing our own people. Basically, like he doesn't want to see this. Tired of seeing black on black crime." And Jerome just kind of gives him a look, not of confusion, but like, basically like, really, dude, like that type of look. Teddy Mac and Franklin. So we see them meet up. Franklin has, of course, new security, upgraded security, with no Peaches and the other guy who got killed that replaced Peaches for one episode before the shooting a couple episodes ago. So he has Avi's guys. Teddy Mac doesn't like it at all. So Teddy Mac immediately goes after Franklin in terms of verbally and saying, like, look, what happened? Franklin explains that it was Peaches, and Peaches on the run. We're gonna find him. Franklin tries to get his normal, I'll take care of it. I got it. Teddy Mac is not having any of it. Teddy Mac is like, look, we're gonna switch things up. I'm gonna tell you when and where the drops are. You're gonna come by yourself. I'll be your security. You're getting sloppy. Um, this is sloppy. I got shot. And Teddy Mack basically, just lets Franklin have it. And, rightfully so. Like, I get shot. This is your doing. And you think I'm supposed to trust you moving forward in terms of security protection. No, no, no. I completely was on the side of Teddy Mack in this scene. Like 1,000%. Like Franklin, Franklin doesn't have a leg to stand on. And, Franklin kind of speaks under his breath, said, motherfucker. But Franklin doesn't have a leg to stand on. And then Tate Mack, comes at him about the real estate, saying that you're too high profile. Franklin says, hey, I need it for my, in terms of the money laundering. So they're at an impasse with that. Franklin refuses to drop it. Teddy Mack wants him to drop it. So we, remember before all this stuff went down, one of the big themes of this whole series, of the whole season, was going to be Teddy Mack versus Franklin. That is back in play. I don't think it was ever off, to be honest with you. It kind of got put on the back burner because of the hits and the introduction of Kane and what have you. But these two don't like each other and they don't trust each other. That's for sure. And but again, this scene I was completely with Teddy Mack. Like he had every right to be like, you know what, we're not doing it. We're switching shit up. It's gonna be my show moving forward in terms of how we do this. So I had Franklin didn't have a leg to stand on in the scene. Leon meets up with Kane. He goes by himself. Now I don't know if he was. I want to say he might have been unarmed, but chances are it doesn't matter because nothing happened. But he comes by himself. Kane says basically you have showed a lot of heart coming on your own. Leon is real humble. Says he wants to sell this. Basically says I'm not that guy that you met, that you grew up watching, that young hothead. He basically says how much he admired Kane and how he handled things and how cool he was and having the girls and looked up to him. And most importantly, he explains what actually happened with Kev and that whole situation. And if you remember, Kev, of course, turned on Franklin and Leon, almost got them all wiped out by he was going to kill one of the Mexican gang members that would have, and if he had done that, that would have wiped out those guys would have wiped them all out. Kane, believes it, but still is like, it still was his brother. Kane ultimately does. Now again, we don't know. We'll find out whether or not, how trustworthy Kane is. I wouldn't trust Kane, as far as you can throw him. But Kane, at the end of the scene, Kane was kind of gave off an impression that Kane at least listened to what Leon was saying, and Kane did say towards the latter part into the scene how much that was able to notice. Again, this was very similar to Jerome as well. Someone noticing how how much they've gone through it mentally. Kane basically said, you must have been through it to change, to be evolving into what you are right now versus the young the young hot shot rambunctious type dude gangster that I grew up watching, seeing on the street. So they talk. We'll see how that that conversation will get relayed to Louie in the following scene that we'll talk about. Louie and Buckley. So there were two Louie and Buckley scenes. Let me just go straight to the last Louie and Buckley scene. So Louie hires Buckley to kill Kane for $150,000. This was even after the scene that we'll talk about, where she basically agreed to kind of call off the dogs, so to speak, and give this so-called deal between Kane and Leon a chance. in the Kane, also getting back to the Kane Leon. Leon wants to cut Kane in in terms of as a business, as a goodwill gesture in terms of making some wants to get Kane in on the drug business and as a goodwill gesture. So that was also an important part of that particular scene. But in the Louie Buckley scene, Louie basically puts the hit on Kane, $150,000. Buckley says, it's very doable because of how because of the access, because of how, Kane is not hiding. And you remember in the last episode, Kane said that he wasn't hiding, that he was going to be basically out in the open. So Buckley says this is very much doable, and that and Louie, after about 15, 20 seconds, once Buckley says, hey, when this is put in play, there's no turning back. Louie decides, stares coldly and decides, let's do it. So you have Teddy and Gustavo. Teddy basically apologizes to Gustavo about leaving him, but look, he got shot. I told you when we did that episode, a couple weeks back, I couldn't knock Teddy Mack for getting out of it. It was survival to finish at that point. Like you get shot in the shoulder, that was just natural instincts. But Teddy apologizes to Gustavo because he needs Gustavo. Basically tells Gustavo, I need your help with some of this bugging equipment that we're going to use to basically spy on Franklin. Says Franklin's getting sloppy, getting lazy, that Franklin's getting lazy. Gustavo, and Teddy tries to get Gustavo basically in his good graces. Now, we know how close Gustavo and Franklin are. Okay, and especially after the last episode, when Franklin went back and, in essence, saved Gustavo's life when he easily could have just left. So, I wonder what Gustavo, will do with this information. It'll be very interesting to see. Louie, Leon, and Franklin. So Leon tells Louie about the deal, and Louie temporarily about the deal between them and Kane. Louie temporarily signs off on it, but as we know, putting the emphasis on temporary with the scene with Buckley, that really she had no intention on honoring that promise of not going after Kane. So, Louie says yes, but later, when she meets up with Buckley, she puts the hit out on Kane for $150,000. We go to Louie and Jerome. So Jerome basically says, look, I don't trust this deal. Tells Louie, you go do what you gotta do. And then she notices him, being kind of quiet, and notices saying, basically ask him, are you okay? And he basically says, yeah, I'm good, but I need to make some changes. Like, I don't want to go back to the community, jamming Jerome's and start businesses and put back into the community and things of that nature. And then he proceeds to propose to her, and of course she says yes. So that was the episode. Again, you have Franklin versus Teddy Mack, and you have Franklin versus Louie. Louie completely goes against what Franklin and both what Franklin and Leon wanted, and it's gonna be very interesting to see how that plays out. You're talking about hiring the cops. Louie, in essence, hired the cops to kill Kane. And again, the repercussions, what transpires out of that is going to be like, there's no coming back from there. Like, when that happens, and I think it's going to happen, there will be no coming back from that. As far as the relationship with Franklin and Louie. So we'll see what happens in terms of that. The MVP is Jerome. I thought our man Joseph, who plays Jerome, was brilliant in this episode, especially during those quiet moments. He basically tracks down a junkie. But we basically find out, so about in terms of Peaches, we basically find out that Peaches was a junkie, and that, you know, and Louis mentioned this as well, that, you know, Franklin killing White Rob, excuse me, not White Rob, White, well, maybe, yeah, his name was White Rob, set um set Peaches off in terms of finding an exit strategy. And Peaches took the money and got out of job, got out of Dodge. But the junkie, and, you know, we find that the junkie takes Franklin, the ex bet, the ex bet, who was, you know, who knew Peaches, takes and who also is a junkie, takes Jerome to the crack house that Peaches was getting high in. And, you know, Jerome sees, you know, what Peaches was doing. Of course, he did not know at all. No one knew that Peaches was getting high, and basically had turned into a crackhead. So during this time, we see Jerome sitting by a pond, and just reflecting on life. I'm gonna read the last two lines of this poem by James Wright, because I mean it fit perfectly with what, you know, what the theme of this episode was. It says a chicken hawk floats over looking for home. I have wasted my life. And basically, you know, you have Leon and Jerome are looking for homes. They're looking for homes again outside of their current situation. And Jerome basically says, you know, to Louis, I don't basically says to Louis, you know, I don't want to waste my life. So you see Jerome say, you know, propose, want to get married, want to go back into business, go back to the community, um, and start businesses. And you saw that at the end of the episode, he goes back to his, you know, his neighborhood where he had the house at. You see people recognize him, and, you know, it's gonna be, again, the transformation and the evolution of Jerome, and also Leon, are not going to be in line with what Franklin Saint wants. And again, everybody, you know, and I'll talk about this. I talk about this almost on every episode. There's no one right now that is all um, in terms of being on the same page as Franklin Saint. When you think about it, not Teddy Mack, not Jerome, not Leon, not Louis, not his fiance, not his mother. I mean, with the exception of maybe Gustavo, who can't be all in because he has to be, he in essence works for Teddy Mack. There's no one in Frank. There's no one that's all in Franklin's corner, and it'll be fascinating to see how he deals with that. And, you know, we have what, 8, 9, 10. We have 3 episodes left, so next week's episodes will be the big wedding. And, you know, there seems there's going to be a mini face-off, it seems like, between Franklin and Louis. So we'll see how that plays out. That's going to wrap it up for this latest edition of the Ril Dil podcast. Thanks for joining me. I will see you next time. Take it easy.